Let me be honest with you from the very first sentence. This is not here to pump you up. It is not here to make you feel good for 20 minutes and then leave you exactly where you started. You have probably been through enough of those moments already. You have read the quotes, you have watched the videos. You have felt that rush of energy that promised everything and delivered very little by the following Tuesday. This is different. What you're about to go through is a training guide, not for your body, not for your career, for the one thing that controls everything else, your mind. And here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. You are at a point in your life where you have enough experience to know that motivation alone does not cut it. You are somewhere between 35 and 45, maybe right in the middle of it, and you have seen enough to know that life does not slow down to wait for you to feel ready. You have responsibilities. You have people counting on you. You have goals that keep getting pushed to next month, next year, next version of yourself. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not a talent gap. It is not a luck gap. It is a training gap. The mind that wins is not born that way. It is built that way, slowly, quietly, through practice and repetition and the willingness to sit inside discomfort without running from it. That is what this guide is about. Building the kind of mind that does not fold under pressure, the kind of mind that stays clear when everything around it is blurry, the kind of mind that keeps showing up even when showing up is the last thing it feels like doing. You do not need to become a different person. You just need to become a steadier version of the one you already are. So let us begin. Chapter 1. The game nobody taught you to play. Here is something nobody tells you when you are growing up. The most important battles in your life will not happen in a boardroom. They will not happen in a courtroom or on a sports field or in some dramatic moment that looks good in a movie. The most important battles will happen inside your own head in the quiet moments when nobody else is watching, when it is just you and your thoughts and the decision of what to do next. That is the inner game, and most people spend their entire lives losing it without ever realizing the game was being played. Think about the last time something did not go the way you planned. A project that fell apart. A conversation that went sideways. A decision that looked right at the time and felt wrong 3 weeks later. What happened inside you in those moments? Did you stay grounded? Did you feel your chest tighten and your thoughts begin to race? Did you say something you later wished you had kept to yourself? Most of us, if we are being honest, lose the inner game long before the outer situation even has a chance to unfold. The doubt creeps in before the meeting starts. The frustration takes over before the conversation reaches its most important point. The anxiety about the result hijacks the process before the process is even halfway through. And here is the painful truth. By the time things go wrong on the outside, they have usually already gone wrong on the inside. The external failure is just the final confirmation of an internal collapse that happened quietly, invisibly, moments or days before. This is why training your mind is not optional. It is the foundation. It is the operating system behind every decision you make, every relationship you navigate, every challenge you either rise to meet or quietly retreat from. If the operating system is unstable, nothing else works properly. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if your mind panics under pressure, the strategy falls apart. You can have the clearest goals, but if your inner world is chaotic, those goals will keep slipping through your fingers no matter how hard you reach for them. The first principle of this entire guide is this: you must win inside before you can win outside. It sounds simple. It is not easy, because winning inside means doing something that goes against every instinct you have been conditioned to follow. It means pausing when everything in you wants to react. It means staying quiet when your emotions are screaming for expression. It means choosing the long game when the short-term relief is sitting right there, warm and inviting and completely destructive. Why most people keep losing the inner game. Let me paint a picture that might feel familiar. You're in a situation that is stressful. Maybe it is a difficult conversation with someone you care about. Maybe it is a professional moment where your work or your judgment is being questioned. Maybe it is just one of those days where everything seems to go slightly wrong in a way that feels personal, as if the universe has specifically decided to test your patience. In that moment, your mind does one of two things. It either stays with you, grounded, observing, choosing how to respond, or it runs ahead of you, chasing every worst-case scenario, replaying every grievance, flooding you with emotion until your ability to think clearly is completely overwhelmed. For most people, the mind runs, and it runs fast. This is not weakness. This is what happens when the inner game has never been trained. The mind defaults to its most primitive setting: react, defend, escape. It is wired for survival, not for wisdom. And without training, it will keep choosing survival responses in situations that call for something far more sophisticated. The people you admire most, the ones who seem to handle pressure with a kind of effortless steadiness, are not wired differently than you. They have simply trained their inner game to a level that makes composure their default setting rather than their exception. That steadiness is available to you, but it has to be built. And building it starts with something that feels almost too simple: awareness. The power of noticing. You cannot change what you do not see. Most people move through their days on autopilot. Their reactions happen before they have even consciously registered what triggered them. Their emotions take over before they have had a chance to observe what is actually happening. Their internal dialogue runs constantly in the background, shaping their perception of every situation, and they never once stop to question whether what that voice is telling them is actually true. Training the inner game begins with the practice of noticing, not judging, not fixing, just noticing. Notice when your mind rushes forward into anxiety about outcomes that have not happened yet. Notice when it drags you backward into resentment about things that are already finished. Notice when it catastrophizes a setback into a verdict about your entire worth as a person. Notice the tension in your shoulders when pressure arrives. Notice the way your breathing changes when something does not go your way. Notice the impulse to speak before you have thought, to defend before you have listened, to escape before you have stayed long enough to understand. This noticing is not passive. It is the first act of discipline, because the moment you notice what is happening inside you, you create a tiny gap between the stimulus and the response. And that gap, however small it is where everything changes. In that gap, you have a choice. You can follow the impulse, react, escalate, surrender control. Or you can do something different, something harder, something that, over time, becomes one of the most powerful habits you will ever build. You can pause. The pause that changes everything. The pause is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. From the outside, it might look like nothing at all. A second of stillness, a breath before words, a moment of quiet consideration before action. But inside that pause, something profound is happening. Control is being reclaimed. When you pause, instead of reacting, you are doing something that untrained minds rarely do. You are inserting intention between emotion and behavior. You are refusing to let the trigger become the leader. You are taking back the power that reactive patterns quietly steal from you every single day. Here is a question worth asking yourself in those moments. What would a controlled response look like right now? Not a perfect response, not an emotionally detached robotic response, a controlled one. One that serves your long-term position rather than your short-term need for relief. Because here is what most of us have to unlearn. Emotional reactions feel powerful. They feel authentic, justified, honest. But they almost always cost more than they deliver. They damage relationships. They undermine credibility. They create regret that lingers long after the moment itself has passed. Controlled responses, on the other hand, rarely feel satisfying in the immediate moment. They do not release tension the way an outburst does. They do not give you the fleeting satisfaction of having expressed exactly what you were feeling without filter. But they build something that emotional reactions consistently destroy. They build trust with others and, more importantly, with yourself. The language of surrender. There is a kind of language that most of us use without realizing what it costs us. He made me angry. She stressed me out. That situation pushed me over the edge. The pressure got to me. These phrases sound reasonable. They sound like honest descriptions of what happened. But look more carefully at what they are actually saying. They are giving credit, authorship, to something outside you for your internal state. They are quietly declaring that your emotions are not your responsibility, that your reactions are not yours to manage, that the world outside you has more control over your inner world than you do. That is a kind of surrender, and it happens so naturally, so habitually, that most people never notice they are surrendering at all. Training the inner game means catching that language and changing it, not to deny that things are difficult, not to pretend that nothing affects you, but to remember that the response is always yours. Nobody makes you react. Circumstances do not force your hand. Your mind responds according to the level of training it has received, and training can always be improved. This is one of the most liberating truths available to anyone at any stage of life. You are not locked into the patterns you have developed. The way you have responded to pressure for the past 20 years is not the way you are condemned to respond for the next 20. The inner game can be retrained at any age, with consistency and patience and the willingness to start small. Building identity through small moments here is something worth understanding about the way identity actually forms. It does not happen in big dramatic moments. It does not crystallize in one life-changing decision or one heroic act of willpower. Identity is built in the small moments, the everyday frustrations, the minor provocations, the moments that do not feel important enough to take seriously as training opportunities, the driver who cuts you off in traffic, the colleague who takes credit for something you did, the conversation that turns tense before you were ready for it, the email that arrives at exactly the wrong time with exactly the wrong tone. These are not interruptions to your life. These are the training ground. If you cannot maintain composure in the small moments, you will not suddenly discover it in the big ones. Composure is not something that shows up on command when the stakes are high. It shows up in high-stakes moments because it has been practiced in low-stakes ones. Every time you pause instead of reacting in a minor situation, you are laying one more brick in the foundation of a steadier identity. Every time you choose the controlled response over the satisfying one, you are sending yourself a message. I am someone who stays in control. I am someone who does not hand my power away easily. That message compounds. Over weeks and months and years, it becomes something deeper than a decision. It becomes who you are. And when who you are is someone who stays grounded under pressure, life looks different. Not because the pressure disappears, because you stop being afraid of it. What winning the inner game actually looks like. Let me be clear about something before we move forward. Winning the inner game does not mean becoming emotionless. It does not mean suppressing what you feel or pretending that difficulty does not affect you. It does not mean becoming the kind of person who is so controlled that they have lost touch with their humanity. It means something quieter than that, something more sustainable. It means that your emotions inform you without controlling you. It means that you can feel anger without letting anger write the script. You can feel fear without letting fear make the decisions. You can feel uncertainty without letting uncertainty freeze you in place. That separation between what you feel and what you do is mastery, not perfection. Mastery, the ongoing practice of choosing response over reaction, intention over impulse, the long game over the short relief. By the time you finish this guide, you will not be a transformed person. Transformation is a word that promises too much too quickly. But you will be more grounded, more deliberate, more capable of staying with yourself when things get hard. And that is where everything begins. Not with confidence, not with motivation, with a mind that has been trained to stay in control. In the next chapter, we are going to talk about the thing that most people misunderstand completely. Discipline. Not the harsh, punishing version of discipline that feels like restriction. The kind of discipline that actually sets you free. Chapter 2. The Freedom of Discipline. Let me ask you something personal. How many times have you woken up in the morning with the best intentions, a clear plan, a genuine commitment, a real desire to do things differently, and then watched those intentions quietly dissolve somewhere between the first distraction and the third excuse? If you are honest, probably more times than you would like to count. And here is what makes that experience so frustrating. It is not that you did not mean it. You did mean it. In the moment you made the commitment, it was real. The problem was not sincerity. The problem was that the commitment was built on a foundation that was never designed to hold weight when things got difficult. That foundation was feeling. You felt motivated. You felt clear. You felt ready. And then the feeling changed, as feelings always do, and without the feeling, the behavior had nothing to stand on. This is the trap that most people spend decades inside without ever fully understanding why they cannot seem to get out of it. They keep waiting for the right feeling, the right mood, the right level of energy and inspiration and internal alignment, and life keeps moving forward without them. Discipline is the answer to that trap, but not the version of discipline most people have been taught to think about. What discipline actually is. When most people hear the word discipline, they picture something uncomfortable, restriction, rigidity, forcing yourself to do things you do not want to do through sheer willpower and gritted teeth. That version of discipline is exhausting, and it does not last. Real discipline is something completely different. Real discipline is the art of removing choice from moments where choice weakens you. Think about that for a moment. There are certain things in your life that you do not debate. You do not wake up every morning and decide whether or not to brush your teeth based on how you feel about it. You do not evaluate your mood before deciding whether to stop at a red light. You do not consult your emotional state before showing up to something that truly matters to you. These behaviors are not driven by motivation. They are driven by standards, rules you have set that operate regardless of how you feel in any given moment. Discipline works exactly the same way. A disciplined mind does not ask, "Do I feel like doing this today?" It asks, "Is this aligned with who I have decided to be?" That shift from emotion-based decision-making to standards-based decision-making is one of the most powerful changes you can make in the way you operate. Because here's the truth about feelings that most people learn too late. Feelings are information. They are not instructions. Your feelings tell you what is happening inside you. They are data points. They are signals worth paying attention to, but they are not qualified to make your decisions for you. When feelings become instructions, when you act only when you feel ready, rest only when you feel motivated, commit only when you feel certain, your life becomes hostage to the most unstable variable in your entire existence. The negotiating mind. Here is something that will probably feel very familiar. You set an intention. You decide you're going to do something, exercise in the morning, work on the project before checking your phone, have the difficult conversation you have been putting off for 3 weeks. And then, in the moment when it is time to actually do the thing, your mind begins to negotiate. Just this once. I will do it later when I have more energy. Today is not the right day. Tomorrow, I will be more prepared. I deserve a break after everything I have been dealing with. Those negotiations feel reasonable. They feel compassionate even, like you are being kind to yourself. But look at what they are actually doing. They are teaching your mind that your standards are negotiable, that your commitments have conditions. That comfort has the authority to override your intentions whenever it shows up and makes a convincing argument. And once comfort has that authority, discipline does not stand a chance. This is not a character flaw. It is a training issue. The negotiating mind is not weak. It is simply untrained. It has learned through years of repetition that if it argues persuasively enough, it can get out of doing the hard thing. So it keeps arguing. It gets better at it. It finds more creative excuses. It makes the case for delay so convincingly that you start to believe the delay is wisdom rather than avoidance. Breaking this pattern does not require willpower. It requires a different kind of decision, one made in advance, before the negotiation begins. You decide who you are before the moment arrives that tests it. Then, when the moment comes, there is nothing to negotiate. The decision has already been made. Standards are not restrictions. They are anchors. Let me offer you a reframe that might change how you think about this. Most people experience standards as limitations, rules that restrict what they can do, what they can feel, how they can behave. And when standards are imposed from the outside, by other people, by institutions, by expectations that do not feel genuinely yours, that experience makes sense. But when standards come from the inside, when they are chosen deliberately as expressions of who you want to be, they do not feel like restrictions at all. They feel like anchors. An anchor does not limit a ship's ability to sail. It prevents the ship from drifting when there is no wind, when the current is unpredictable, when the conditions make navigation uncertain. The anchor is what keeps the ship in position until it is ready to move with intention rather than at the mercy of whatever is happening around it. Your standards are that anchor. They are what keep you in position when emotions are turbulent, when motivation has temporarily disappeared, when circumstances are doing everything in their power to pull you off course. Some standards worth considering, not as rules to follow, but as examples of what standards actually look like in practice. I do not make important decisions when I am emotionally flooded. I do not say things in anger that I will need to apologize for tomorrow. I show up to my commitments regardless of how I feel when the alarm goes off. I do not abandon a process just because results are slow. These standards will not always be easy to maintain. There will be moments when every part of you wants to override them. But that is exactly when they matter most. Standards are not for easy moments. They are for difficult ones. That is their entire purpose. Feelings still show up. They just lose their veto power. I want to be clear about something because there is a misunderstanding that needs to be addressed. Choosing discipline over feelings does not mean suppressing your feelings. It does not mean pretending that emotions do not exist or that they do not matter. Emotional intelligence is real, and dismissing what you feel is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of avoidance wearing a different costume. What it means is this: your feelings are welcome at the table. They are just not allowed to run the meeting. You can feel resistant to doing the hard thing and do it anyway. You can feel uncertain about a decision and still make it with clarity. You can feel exhausted and still show up. The feeling does not have to disappear before the behavior is possible. The feeling and the behavior can coexist. This is a radical shift for most people because most of us have been unconsciously operating under the belief that we need to feel a certain way before we can act a certain way, that we need to feel confident before we can be decisive, that we need to feel motivated before we can be consistent, that we need to feel ready before we can begin. None of that is true. Action precedes feeling far more often than feeling precedes action. When you do the thing despite the resistance usually quiets. When you show up despite the reluctance often fades. The feeling catches up to the behavior, not the other way round. But you have to move first. Pressure is when discipline proves itself. Here is something important to understand about the relationship between discipline and pressure. When things are easy, when life is flowing, when you are rested and clear and everything seems to be working in your favor, discipline is relatively simple. Almost anyone can stay disciplined when the conditions are comfortable. The real test comes when pressure arrives, when you are tired, when results are not showing up the way you expected, when someone or something is challenging your decisions, your worth, your direction, when the reasons to stop seem far more compelling than the reasons to continue. In those moments, you do not rise to your potential. You fall to your level of discipline. That phrase is worth sitting with, because most people, in moments of pressure, discover that their level of discipline is lower than they thought it was. Not because they are not capable of more, but because they have been building their behavior on the unstable foundation of motivation rather than the solid ground of trained standards. If your discipline is weak when pressure arrives, pressure will expose it. This is not cruel, it is honest. And honesty, even when it is uncomfortable, is far more useful than the illusion of strength that collapses the moment it is genuinely tested. But if your discipline is strong, built through repetition, through small consistent choices made over time, then pressure does not break it. Pressure sharpens it. This is the paradox that disciplined people understand and reactive people rarely discover. Difficulty does not destroy training. It reveals it. And what gets revealed in those moments is either the foundation you have built or the foundation you have been telling yourself you were building. The quiet freedom on the other side. I said at the beginning of this chapter that real discipline is freedom. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you are not disciplined, you are at the mercy of everything. Your mood determines your productivity. Your energy levels determine your commitments. Your emotional weather determines how you show up for the people who are counting on you. You are constantly at the effect of circumstances rather than at the cause of outcomes. That is not freedom. That is just a more comfortable-looking version of being controlled. When discipline becomes real, when standards replace negotiations, when behavior is decoupled from mood, something changes that is difficult to describe until you have experienced it. The constant internal debate quiets. The exhausting back and forth between what you know you should do and what you feel like doing becomes less frequent and less intense. You are no longer spending energy deciding whether to do the things you have already committed to. That energy, and it is a surprising amount of energy, becomes available for something else, for clearer thinking, for deeper presence, for the kind of attention that makes a genuine difference in the things that genuinely matter to you. And perhaps more importantly, you begin to trust yourself in a way that changes everything. Self-trust is not arrogance. It is not blind confidence. It is the quiet, settled knowledge that when you say you will do something, you will do it, that your commitments have weight, That your word to yourself and to others means something concrete rather than something aspirational. When you trust yourself to follow through, you stop the constant second-guessing. You stop seeking external reassurance that you are on the right track. You stop hesitating at thresholds that used to feel impossible to cross. You simply move. Chapter 3. Calm is not a personality trait. There is a person you probably know. Maybe you have worked with them. Maybe they are in your family. Maybe you have watched them from a distance and wondered how they do it. When everything around them is chaotic, when the pressure is at its highest, when everyone else is losing their composure, this person stays remarkably calm. And if you are anything like most people, you have probably told yourself some version of the same story about them. They are just wired that way. It is their personality. Some people are naturally calm and some people are not. And the ones who are not just have to manage as best they can. That story is comfortable. It is also completely wrong. Calm is not a personality trait. Calm is a skill. And like every other skill that matters in life, it can be learned, practiced, and developed to a level that makes it reliable rather than accidental. What happens in your body before your mind knows here is something worth understanding about the way pressure actually works. When a stressful situation arrives, your body responds before your mind has had a chance to consciously process what is happening. Your breathing shortens. Your muscles begin to tighten. Your heart rate increases. Your thoughts begin to accelerate, moving faster than they should, jumping ahead of themselves, catastrophizing before all the information is even in. If you do not catch this early, if you are not trained to notice these physical signals when they first appear, your mind loses control before you even realize it is happening. And once the body is in a state of alarm, the mind follows it down. Emotion takes over. Clarity disappears. The reactive patterns that are wired deepest in your nervous system take the wheel. This is why staying calm under pressure does not begin with thinking your way to calm. It begins with your body. The mind does not calm the body under pressure. The body calms the mind. This is a sequence that most people get backwards. They tell themselves to calm down while their body is still flooded with stress hormones. They try to think clearly while every physical signal they are receiving is telling their nervous system that they are under threat. And then they wonder why the effort to calm down feels so frustrating and so futile. Training calm means learning to work from the outside in. Slow the breath deliberately. Lower your shoulders. Relax the muscles in your jaw. These are not small or symbolic actions. They are direct communications to your nervous system, signals that interrupt the alarm response and begin to create the physiological conditions for clear thinking. Once the body settles, the mind regains its footing. The thoughts slow down. The perception widens. Options that were invisible a moment ago begin to come back into view. This sequence is trainable, and with enough repetition, it becomes automatic. A response pattern that activates reliably under pressure, rather than a technique you have to consciously remember to use. Calm as competitive advantage. Here is something that becomes clear once you have developed a genuine capacity for calm under pressure. In almost every situation where stress is elevated, in business, in relationships, in conflict, in any high-stakes interaction, the calmest person in the room has an enormous advantage over everyone else. Not because calm makes you faster, not because it makes you smarter or more talented, but because calm gives you something that pressure reliably takes away from everyone who has not trained for it. Options. When you are calm, you can see choices that panicked minds cannot access. You can hear information that reactive minds are too overwhelmed to process. You can wait for the right moment when everyone else is rushing toward the wrong one. Speed feels powerful under pressure, but speed without clarity is not an advantage. It is a liability. Most of the worst decisions in life are made quickly, not thoughtfully. Most of the damage that takes years to repair was done in moments of unchecked emotion when calm was the one thing that could have prevented it. Calm allows you to see what actually matters in a situation, separate from what feels most urgent. And those two things are rarely the same. The person who stays calm when everyone else is escalating does not just make better decisions for themselves. They change the temperature of the entire room. People unconsciously mirror the emotional states of those around them. When you stay regulated, those around you begin to regulate. When you stay steady, steadiness becomes possible in the space you share with others. This is influence without force, authority without volume, leadership without a title, and it is available to anyone who is willing to train for it. Chapter 4. The Art of the Controlled Response. Let me tell you about a moment that probably lives somewhere in your memory, a moment when someone said something, in a meeting, in a conversation, in a message that arrived at exactly the wrong time, and something inside you ignited. You felt it immediately, that surge of heat moving up through your chest, the sudden narrowing of your focus, the words forming before you had even decided to speak. And maybe you said them. Maybe you sent the message. Maybe you had the reaction that felt completely justified in the moment and completely regrettable approximately 45 minutes later. Or maybe, and this is the more quietly painful version, you held it in. You suppressed it. You swallowed what you wanted to say, and it sat in you for the rest of the day, leaking into every interaction, coloring everything with a resentment you could not quite shake. Neither of those outcomes is what you actually wanted. What you wanted was something in the middle, something you never quite managed to access in that moment. The controlled response. The controlled response is not silence. It is not explosion. It is not suppression, and it is not surrender. It is the ability to feel everything that is happening inside you and still choose what happens next. That ability is what this chapter is about. Reactions are habits, not truths. Here is the first thing worth understanding about your reactions. They feel automatic. They feel immediate and inevitable, like there was no gap between the trigger and the response, like choice was never really available. But that feeling is an illusion. Reactions are not facts about who you are. They are habits, deeply grooved patterns of response that have been reinforced over years and decades of repetition until they feel like they are simply part of your nature. They are not. Habits can be examined, habits can be understood, and habits, with the right kind of consistent practice, can be changed. The reason reactive patterns feel so permanent is that most people never create the conditions necessary to interrupt them. The trigger arrives, the nervous system responds, the behavior follows, And the whole sequence happens so quickly that awareness never gets a chance to step in between the stimulus and the response. Training your reactions means slowing that sequence down, not to eliminate it, but to insert something into the gap that changes what comes out the other side. That something is the pause, what the pause actually costs you, and what it gives you. The pause is uncomfortable. Let us be completely honest about that from the start. When something triggers you, when someone challenges you, criticizes you, dismisses you, or says something that hits a nerve you did not even know you had, every instinct you possess is going to push you toward speed. Respond now. Defend yourself now. Make sure they know exactly where you stand right now. That urgency feels like strength. It feels like authenticity, like you are being true to yourself by expressing what you feel without filtering it through anything as slow and deliberate as thought. But here is what that urgency is actually doing. It is handing control to the trigger. The moment you react without pause, the thing that triggered you becomes the leader of the interaction. You become the follower. You are no longer operating from your values, your standards, your long-term interests. You are operating from the emotional charge of a single moment, and that charge is not always, in fact, it is rarely aligned with what you actually want to create. The pause costs you the relief of immediate expression. That is real. That relief is genuine, and giving it up is not comfortable. But here is what the pause gives you in return. It gives you back the authorship of your own behavior. In the space created by the pause, you get to decide who you are in this moment, not who you are when you are triggered and overwhelmed. Who you actually are, the person you have decided to be, the standards you have chosen for yourself. That is not a small thing. That is everything. The silence that speaks. There is a particular kind of response that most people drastically underestimate. No response at all. Not avoidance. Not fear. Not backing down from something that deserves engagement. But the deliberate, conscious choice to let silence do work that words would only complicate. When someone provokes you and you do not react, when you receive the comment, the challenge, the attempt to destabilize you with the kind of stillness that says, "I heard you and I am choosing not to be moved," something interesting happens. The other person loses momentum. They were expecting resistance. They were expecting emotion. They were calibrated for a reaction that would give them something to push back against, something to escalate off of, something to use as confirmation that they had gotten to you. When that reaction does not come, they are left with nothing to build on. You, meanwhile, have not lost anything. You have gained something. You have demonstrated to them, and more importantly to yourself, that you cannot be easily destabilized, that your composure is not a performance that shatters under the right kind of pressure, that you are someone who chooses engagement rather than being compelled into it. This is not manipulation. This is not a tactic designed to make others feel a certain way. It is the natural consequence of being genuinely in control of your own responses, and the effect it has on the dynamics of any interaction is significant. People respect those who are not easily moved, not because stoicism is inherently admirable, but because self-command signals something deep and real about a person's relationship with themselves. It signals that they do not need external validation to feel secure. that they are not looking for permission from circumstances to maintain their composure. That signal changes everything about how others engage with you. Labeling the emotion before it labels you. Here is a technique that sounds almost too simple to be as powerful as it is. When you feel a strong emotional reaction forming, when the charge is rising and the urge to respond immediately is building, name what you are feeling. Not out loud, unless that is appropriate in the context. Internally, to yourself. Anger, defensiveness, embarrassment, anxiety. Just that. Just the label. This practice has been studied extensively, and what the research consistently shows is that naming an emotion creates measurable distance from it. When you observe what you are feeling and name it, you shift from being inside the emotion to being slightly outside it. A witness to your own experience rather than someone completely swept up in it. That distance is not large, but it is enough. Enough to slow the sequence between feeling and reaction just slightly. Enough to create the conditions for a choice to exist where there was no choice before. Once you have labeled the emotion and created that small gap, you can ask yourself a simple question. What is the most useful response I can offer right now? Not the most satisfying response, not the most emotionally authentic response, the most useful one, the one that serves what you actually care about beyond this moment. Sometimes the most useful response is firm and direct. Sometimes it is quiet and measured. Sometimes it is genuinely saying nothing and letting the moment pass. But whichever it is chosen. It belongs to you. It reflects who you have decided to be. That is the difference between reaction and response. Reaction happens to you. Response is something you create. The energy equation. There is an aspect of emotional reactivity that does not get talked about enough. It is exhausting, not just in the obvious way, the aftermath of a difficult interaction, the residue of conflict, the energy that goes into managing the consequences of words said too quickly or decisions made in the heat of emotion. But in a quieter, more cumulative way that most people never fully connect to the pattern causing it. Every time you react without control, you spend mental and emotional resources that do not immediately replenish, resources that were needed for other things, for clarity, for creativity, for presence in the relationships and the work that matter most to you. Reactive people are tired in a way that sleep does not fix, because the exhaustion is not physical. It is the depletion that comes from constantly being at the mercy of circumstances, constantly having your attention hijacked by triggers, constantly spending energy on battles that did not need to be fought, and interactions that did not need to escalate the way they did. Controlled people conserve that energy, not because they are less affected by things, not because nothing reaches them, but because they have developed the habit of choosing which things deserve their response and which things deserve to simply pass. This selectivity, this conscious choice about where emotional energy goes, is one of the most significant advantages of trained self-control, because energy conserved is energy available. And when your energy is available, it can go toward the things that actually change your life rather than the things that simply disturb your day. Over time, this conservation compounds. Less regret means less energy spent processing and repairing. Less unnecessary conflict means more clarity available for genuine challenges. Less reactivity means more presence, and presence, real presence, is one of the rarest and most valuable things you can offer in any area of your life. Chapter 5. The Quiet Power of Mental Endurance. Most people can push hard for a short time, sprinting toward a goal when the energy is high and the motivation is fresh and everything feels possible. Showing up with intensity when the stakes are obvious and the excitement is real and the finish line is visible enough to keep pulling you forward. That kind of effort is not rare. You have probably done it many times in your life. You know what it feels like to give everything you have in a concentrated burst of focused energy toward something that matters to you. But here is what is actually rare. What actually separates the people who create lasting change in their lives from the people who repeatedly find themselves starting over. Staying power. The ability to remain steady and engaged and committed, not when everything is exciting and new and clearly moving in the right direction, but when the novelty has worn off, when progress is invisible, when effort feels unrewarded, when the reasons to stop are accumulating faster than the reasons to continue. Mental endurance is that staying power, and it is built differently than motivation. It is built differently than confidence. It is built in a way that most people never attempt because they do not realize that what they are experiencing, the resistance, the tedium, the urge to escape, is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is working. The resistance is the training. Your mind is wired to seek comfort. This is not a flaw. It is biology. For most of human history, the ability to conserve energy and avoid unnecessary discomfort was a survival advantage. The mind learned to interpret difficulty as danger and comfort as safety, and it learned those lessons so thoroughly that they are now embedded at a level that operates below conscious thought. The problem is that the goals worth pursuing in the life you actually want to live require sustained effort in the presence of discomfort. They require showing up when the mind is sending every signal it can think of to suggest that stopping would be the rational, reasonable, self-caring thing to do. This is not working. This is too hard. You should rest. You deserve a break. You have done enough for today. These thoughts feel like wisdom. In certain contexts, they are. Rest is real. Limits are real. The body and mind have genuine needs that deserve respect. But there is a difference between genuine need and trained avoidance. And that difference is something most people have never learned to distinguish because they have always responded to the first signal of discomfort by retreating from it. Mental endurance is built by doing something different, by staying present inside the discomfort just a little longer than you think you can. Not indefinitely, not to the point of genuine damage, just past the first wave of resistance, which is almost always the loudest and almost never the most accurate signal about what you are actually capable of. Because here is what happens when you stay. The resistance does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes familiar, and familiar things lose their power to frighten you. What once felt like a warning, "This is too hard, I cannot do this," begins to feel like information. This is challenging. I can stay with challenging. That shift is not dramatic. It does not happen all at once. But it accumulates. And over time, the accumulation becomes something remarkable. A mind that trusts itself to endure. A nervous system that has learned through repeated experience that difficulty is survivable, that discomfort is not danger, that staying is possible even when everything inside you is arguing for the exit. What endurance does to failure. Let me talk about something that almost never gets discussed in the context of mental strength. The relationship between endurance and how you experience failure. When mental endurance is low, failure is devastating in a way that goes beyond the practical consequences of what went wrong. It becomes personal. It becomes a verdict. It attaches itself to identity in a way that makes moving forward feel not just difficult, but somehow dishonest, as if continuing after failure would require pretending it did not happen, or pretending it did not mean what it clearly means about you. I am not good enough for this. This is not for people like me. I always end up in the same place. These conclusions feel logical in the immediate aftermath of failure. They feel like honest assessments rather than emotional reactions dressed up in the language of reason. But they are shortcuts. They are the mind's way of making meaning too quickly, before all the information is in, before the perspective that only time can provide has had a chance to arrive. A mind with genuine endurance does not rush to meaning after failure. It stays with the experience longer. It separates what happened from what it means about who you are. It treats the failure as data, useful, important, worth examining carefully, rather than as a verdict that closes doors and ends conversations. This distinction changes everything about how you move through setbacks. When failure attacks identity, people quit to protect what is left of their self-image. When failure is treated as information, people adjust and continue. The process does not stop. The commitment does not dissolve. The direction may shift based on what was learned, but the fundamental orientation toward growth, toward consistency, toward showing up again, remains intact. That orientation is endurance made visible, and it is what keeps ordinary effort, sustained over time, producing results that look extraordinary to everyone who only sees the outcome and not the years of quiet persistence that made it possible. The underrated value of silence and stillness. There is one more dimension of mental endurance that I want to bring your attention to, because it is one that people at your stage of life often find unexpectedly challenging. The ability to sit with silence. We live in a world that is engineered to fill every quiet moment with stimulation. The phone, the notification, the background noise of media and opinion and information that never stops arriving. And most people, without fully realizing it, have lost the capacity to simply be present with their own thoughts without immediately reaching for something to fill the space. This matters for endurance because the mind that cannot tolerate silence cannot build depth. It skims across the surface of everything, tasks, conversations, ideas, without ever settling into the sustained attention that produces genuine understanding, genuine skill, genuine connection. Training mental endurance includes training the capacity to be still, to sit with a difficult problem without immediately reaching for distraction, to stay with your own thoughts without needing to escape them, to let the discomfort of uncertainty exist without rushing to resolve it prematurely. This stillness is not passive. It is one of the most active things a mind can do. And in a world where sustained attention has become genuinely rare, it is one of the most valuable. Those who can stay, and with effort, with uncertainty, with discomfort, with silence, will consistently outperform those who cannot. Not because they are more talented or more fortunate, but simply because they were willing to remain in the room long after everyone else had found a reason to leave. Chapter 6. Thinking Clearly When Everything is Loud. There is a particular kind of overwhelm that people in the middle of their lives know intimately. It is not the overwhelm of youth, where everything is new and uncertain, and you are figuring out who you are while simultaneously trying to navigate a world that does not slow down to let you catch up. That overwhelm has its own texture, its own specific weight. The overwhelm I am talking about is different. It is the overwhelm of someone who has accumulated real responsibilities, real relationships, real consequences, someone who has enough experience to know that decisions matter, that mistakes cost something, that the people around them are genuinely affected by the choices they make. Someone who is no longer just responsible for themselves. At this stage of life, the noise is not just external, it is internal. The competing priorities, the unresolved tensions, the goals that pull in different directions, the voice that asks whether you are doing enough, being enough, moving fast enough, in the right direction at all. And into all of that noise, chaos arrives. A crisis at work, a fracture in a relationship, a health scare, a financial pressure, a decision that needs to be made before you feel ready to make it. In those moments, the ability to think clearly is not a luxury. It is survival, and it is a skill that most people have never deliberately trained. The myth of more information. When chaos arrives, the instinct of most intelligent, conscientious people is to gather more information, more data, more opinions, more research, more perspectives, more time spent consuming content that might somehow produce the clarity that currently feels so elusive. This instinct is understandable, and it is almost always wrong. More information does not produce clarity, not when the mind is already overwhelmed. Pouring more input into a system that is already overloaded does not help it process better. It adds to the noise. It multiplies the variables. It creates the illusion of progress. Look how much I am doing. Look how seriously I am taking this, while the actual capacity for clear decision-making continues to deteriorate. Trained minds do the opposite of what instinct suggests when chaos increases. They reduce inputs. They narrow focus rather than widening it. They eliminate rather than accumulate. They ask, what can I remove from my attention right now, rather than what else should I be paying attention to? This is deeply counterintuitive. It feels irresponsible. It feels like you are missing something important by not consuming everything available on the subject. But the reality is that most information available in any situation does not actually change the decision. It creates anxiety. It generates doubt. It adds variables that ultimately resolve to the same fundamental choice that was always there, underneath all the noise. A clear mind knows how to cut to that choice, not by gathering everything, but by eliminating everything that is not essential. the one question that cuts through everything. There is a question that I want you to start carrying with you into difficult situations. A question that has the power to cut through noise faster than almost anything else I know. What is the one thing that matters most right now? Not the 5 most important things. Not a ranked list of priorities. One thing. The single most important thing that, if addressed with full attention and genuine clarity, would move everything else forward or render it irrelevant. This question is deceptively simple, and it is harder to answer than it sounds. Because in the middle of chaos, everything feels urgent. Everything feels equally critical. The mind, overwhelmed by the pressure of too many competing demands, loses its ability to distinguish between what is genuinely important and what merely feels urgent in this moment. Urgency and importance are not the same thing. They feel the same under pressure, but they are not. Urgency is a feeling. Importance is a fact about consequences. And a trained mind learns to separate those two things even when every emotional signal is telling it that they are identical. When you ask, what is the one thing that matters most right now, you are forcing your mind to do something that overwhelmed minds resist. You are forcing it to prioritize, to make a judgment about what deserves full attention versus what can wait, what is genuinely critical versus what is merely loud, what will actually matter in a week versus what only feels catastrophic in this moment. That judgment is the beginning of clarity, and clarity, once established even partially, tends to expand. One clear decision creates the conditions for the next one. One priority, addressed with genuine focus, often resolves several adjacent concerns that felt separate but were actually connected. This is how trained minds navigate chaos. Not by solving everything simultaneously, by finding the thread that, when pulled, begins to unravel the complexity into something manageable. The emotional filter problem. Here is something that complicates clear thinking in ways that most people never fully examine. Strong emotions do not just affect how you feel, they affect what you see. When fear is elevated, your perception of threats magnifies. Small risks look large. Unlikely outcomes feel certain. The range of options you can perceive narrows significantly because fear is designed to focus attention on danger and away from everything else. When anger is running the show, your perception of options narrows differently. You can see confrontation clearly. You can see justification. You can see the argument you want to make and the point you want to prove. What becomes invisible are the paths that do not involve conflict, the perspectives that might complicate your certainty, the information that does not fit the narrative your anger has already written. When anxiety floods the system, decision-making becomes almost impossible. Because anxiety specializes in uncertainty, and every decision contains uncertainty, which means every decision feels dangerous, which means no decision feels safe, which means the most comfortable thing becomes paralysis. Staying exactly where you are and hoping that clarity will arrive on its own. It rarely does. Training clarity in chaos means training emotional regulation not as a separate skill, but as a prerequisite for clear thinking. You cannot think well when you are emotionally flooded. The neurological reality is that when the emotional centers of the brain are highly activated, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for judgment, planning, and nuanced decision-making becomes less accessible. This is not a metaphor. This is how the brain actually works under stress. And knowing this changes everything about how you approach difficult situations. The work of getting clear is not cognitive first. It is emotional first. Before you try to solve the problem, you stabilize the state, slow the breath, lower the physical arousal, create just enough distance from the emotional charge that your thinking brain can come back online. Then, and only then, do you begin to reason. Language shapes reality, especially under pressure. There is something that happens in the mind under pressure that most people never notice because it happens so quickly and so automatically. The internal narrative shifts. The story you are telling yourself about what is happening, who is responsible, what it means, what is at stake, what your options are, becomes more dramatic, more catastrophic, more certain in its conclusions than the actual situation warrants. This is happening. Everything is falling apart. I cannot handle this. There is no good option here. Whatever I do will be wrong. These narratives feel like accurate descriptions of reality. They do not feel like stories. They feel like facts. And that is precisely what makes them so dangerous to clear thinking. Because if the narrative is accepted as fact, decisions are made on the basis of a distorted reality, a reality filtered through fear and overwhelm, and the particular catastrophizing tendencies that your mind has developed over years of responding to stress. The language you use internally is not neutral. It actively shapes your perception of the situation and, by extension, the range of responses you can see is available. Dramatic internal language, everything is falling apart, this is impossible, I cannot do this, narrows perception. It tells your nervous system that the situation is dire, which increases arousal, which further impairs clear thinking. It is a loop, and once it starts, it accelerates. Grounded internal language does the opposite, not false positivity, not telling yourself that everything is fine when it clearly is not, but language that is accurate rather than amplified, language that describes what is actually happening without adding layers of catastrophe that exist in the interpretation rather than in the facts. This is complex. I need to slow down and think. I am feeling pressure right now, and that is understandable. Let me find the most important thing to address first. I have navigated difficulty before. I can navigate this. This kind of language does not solve the problem, but it creates the internal conditions in which the problem can be approached with clarity rather than panic. And that difference between approaching a problem with clarity versus approaching it with panic is often the difference between a good outcome and a poor one. The courage to wait. There is a form of wisdom that our culture consistently undervalues, and our nervous systems are consistently terrible at accessing under pressure. The wisdom of waiting, not procrastination, not avoidance, not the passive hope that if you ignore something long enough, it will resolve itself. Genuine, active, intentional waiting, the choice to hold a decision open because the conditions for a good decision have not yet fully formed. Most people, when they are uncomfortable with uncertainty, feel an almost physical urgency to resolve it, to make the decision, any decision, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. And this urgency is not random. It is the mind's way of trying to reduce the anxiety that uncertainty generates by creating certainty, even artificial certainty, even certainty that is premature and potentially harmful. Trained minds resist this. They have developed the capacity to hold tension without rushing to resolve it, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing what the right answer is and trust that staying with the question longer will produce a better answer than forcing a conclusion before the information is complete. This capacity, the ability to tolerate ambiguity without panicking, is one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive skills available. It is what allows people to see situations fully before responding to them. It is what prevents the majority of avoidable mistakes, which are made not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of patience. The next time you feel that urgent pull toward a decision you are not ready to make, try something different. Ask yourself whether the urgency is real, whether something genuinely changes if you wait another hour, another day, another week, or whether the urgency is simply the feeling of discomfort seeking relief. More often than you might expect, the answer will be that the urgency is not real, that waiting is possible, that the situation can tolerate the patience required to approach it with clarity rather than haste, and that patience, practiced consistently, becomes one of the most powerful tools in your entire cognitive repertoire. Chapter 7. The voice inside your head is running the show. Let me tell you something that might be the most important idea in this entire guide. There is a voice inside your head that never stops talking. It narrates your experience as it happens. It interprets events before you have had a chance to consider them consciously. It makes judgments about you, about other people, about what situations mean and what the future holds. And most people, including most people who consider themselves self-aware, reflective, emotionally intelligent, have almost no relationship with that voice. They are not observing it. They are not examining it. They are simply living inside it, accepting its constant commentary as truth, allowing it to shape their perception of reality in ways they have never once questioned. That voice is not the truth. It is a habit. It is the accumulated pattern of interpretations, conclusions, fears, and self-assessments that your mind has developed over decades of experience. Some of those patterns are accurate and useful. Some of them are outdated and harmful. Some of them were formed in moments of pain or failure that are long past, but whose echoes are still running in the background, still shaping how you see yourself and what you believe is possible for you. Training your self-talk is not about becoming someone who is always positive. It is not about affirmations or mantras or the performance of optimism. It is about developing an honest, accurate, useful relationship with the voice that is already running the show, so that instead of being unconsciously controlled by it, you can consciously direct it. The difference between tone and content. Most people, when they think about changing their self-talk, focus on the content, the specific things they are saying to themselves, the particular judgments or criticisms or catastrophic predictions. But there is something that precedes content and shapes it more powerfully than most people realize. Tone, the emotional quality of the inner voice, whether it is harsh or measured, whether it is urgent or calm, whether it sounds like a critic looking for evidence of your inadequacy or a coach looking for information that can be used constructively. Tone sets the emotional direction of everything that follows. A harsh internal tone creates tension in the body, narrows perception, and activates the defensive patterns that make genuine learning and growth nearly impossible. An urgent internal tone creates anxiety that distorts judgment and pushes toward the premature decisions we discussed in the previous chapter. A defeated internal tone drains the energy that effort requires before the effort has even begun. A trained inner voice is not kind in the way a cheerleader is kind. It is not telling you that everything is wonderful when it clearly is not. It is neutral. It is firm. It is the voice of someone who is genuinely on your side, not because they are protecting you from difficult truths, but because they are committed to helping you navigate them effectively. That distinction between a critic and a coach, between a voice that attacks and a voice that directs, is one of the most important shifts you can make in your entire relationship with yourself. Critics create fear. Coaches create movement. And the mind cannot lead itself effectively when it is constantly under attack from its own internal dialogue. The questions that change direction. Here is something practical that you can begin applying immediately. The questions your self-talk asks determine where your attention goes, and where your attention goes determines what becomes possible. Most people, after a setback or a failure, ask questions that have no useful answers. Questions that feel like examination, but function like punishment. Why does this always happen to me? What is wrong with me? Why can I never get this right? Why am I still in this same place after all this time? These questions are not investigations. They are indictments. And the mind, because it is designed to answer questions, will dutifully search for evidence to support the accusation embedded in each one. It will find patterns. It will construct narratives. It will build a case for the conclusion the question was already pointing toward, that something is fundamentally, persistently wrong with you. A trained mind asks different questions, not easier questions, not questions that avoid accountability, questions that are genuinely oriented toward learning and forward movement. What actually happened here? What can I learn from this that I did not know before? What would I do differently, knowing what I know now? What is the most useful next step? These questions do the same thing questions are supposed to do. They direct the mind's attention and processing power toward a subject. But they direct it toward something that can produce useful output rather than something that can only produce more pain. The information that comes back from these questions is actionable. It informs decisions. It adjusts behavior. It builds the kind of self-knowledge that actually improves performance over time, rather than the kind of self-criticism that simply accumulates as another layer of doubt. Consistency is what makes it real. Here is the challenge with self-talk training that most people encounter and too few persist through. It requires consistency that does not feel dramatic. You are not going to have one profound conversation with yourself and permanently rewire the voice in your head. That is not how this works. The patterns that are currently running in your internal dialogue have been reinforced thousands, possibly tens of thousands of times. They are deeply grooved. They feel automatic because they are automatic, because they have been practiced to the point of being reflexive. Changing them requires the same thing that changed them in the first place: repetition. Consistent, deliberate repetition of a different kind of internal response. Again and again, in moment after moment, in situation after situation, until the new pattern begins to develop its own groove, until the new way of speaking to yourself begins to feel more natural than the old way, until the trained voice becomes the default voice rather than the voice you have to consciously choose. This does not happen quickly. That is not a discouragement. It is an honest description of how real change actually works. And knowing it up front prevents the particular kind of frustration that comes from expecting a transformation that should take months to happen in days. What you can notice quickly, even in the first week of genuine attention to your internal dialogue, is the moment of awareness. The moment when you catch the old pattern in action, when you notice the harsh tone, the catastrophic prediction, the self-critical spiral beginning to form, and you recognize it for what it is, a habit, not a truth, before it has had a chance to run its full course. That moment of awareness is not the end of the work, but it is the beginning of something real, because awareness creates choice, and choice is where training lives. Every time you catch the pattern and redirect it, even imperfectly, even partially, even in a way that feels clumsy and deliberate, and nothing like the effortless self-command you're aiming for, you are doing the work. You are laying one more layer of the foundation that will eventually become something solid. And solid, in the context of the internal voice, means something profoundly valuable. It means that under pressure, when the stakes are high and the emotions are loud and everything is pushing you toward the familiar reactive patterns, you have something to fall back on that is stronger than the old habits. A voice that directs rather than attacks, a voice that instructs rather than condemns, a voice that says clearly and without drama, here is what matters and here is what to do next. That voice is not a gift. It is not a personality trait that some people have and others do not. It is something built, one deliberate repetition at a time, by anyone willing to do the work. And it is, quietly and without fanfare, one of the most powerful things you will ever build. Chapter 8. Show up. Every single time. Let me start this final chapter with something that might surprise you. The most successful people you admire, the ones who have built something real, who have relationships that last, who seem to navigate difficulty with a kind of grounded consistency that looks almost effortless from the outside, are not more talented than you. They are not more intelligent. They have not been handed circumstances so much better than yours that comparison feels unfair. The single most significant difference between them and the people who keep almost getting there, who keep starting over, who keep finding themselves in the same place despite genuine effort and real intention, is not talent or luck or timing. It is that they show up consistently, without waiting for the conditions to be perfect, without requiring emotional permission before they act, without needing the feeling of readiness to arrive before they begin. They show up when they are tired. They show up when they are uncertain. They show up when progress is invisible and results feel distant, and the honest truth is that they have no idea whether what they are doing is going to work. They show up when nobody is watching, when nobody is applauding, when there is no external signal telling them that their effort is worthwhile. They just show up again and again and again, and over time, that showing up, ordinary, unglamorous, undramatic as it is, produces something that nothing else can produce. A life that is actually moving, a self that is actually changing. Results that look sudden from the outside, but are the inevitable outcome of years of invisible consistency. This chapter is about building that. Not the dramatic version of showing up that feels heroic and cinematic. The real version, the quiet, daily, sometimes boring, always necessary practice of being present for your own life, regardless of how you feel about it in any given moment. Why we wait and what it costs us. Before we talk about how to show up consistently, we need to be honest about why we do not. Because it is not laziness, not really. If you are the kind of person who has read this far, who has stayed with these ideas through 7 chapters of genuine examination, laziness is not your primary obstacle. You are not someone who simply does not care enough to try. Your obstacle is something more subtle and, in many ways, more difficult to overcome than laziness. You are waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel motivated enough, energized enough, clear enough, confident enough, certain enough that what you are about to do will work before you commit fully to doing it. Waiting for internal alignment, that particular feeling of being in sync with what you are doing, of everything pointing in the same direction, of effort feeling natural rather than forced. That feeling is real. It exists. There are moments when showing up is genuinely easy, when the energy is there and the direction is clear and the work flows in a way that makes you wonder why you ever found it difficult. But those moments are not the foundation of a consistent life. They are the bonus. They are the days when everything cooperates, and they are wonderful when they arrive. The foundation is built on the other days, the days when the feeling is not there, when the energy is low and the direction feels murky and the work is grinding rather than flowing. The days when everything in you is constructing a reasonable argument for why today is not the right day, why this particular morning would be better used for rest, why the conditions will be better tomorrow, and the effort would be more effective then. Those days are not exceptions. For anyone pursuing anything meaningful, those days are the norm. The exception is the day when everything feels aligned. And if you are waiting for alignment before you show up, you are building your consistency on the rarest available foundation. You are guaranteeing, by design, that your presence in your own life will be intermittent, conditional, available only when circumstances cooperate. That conditionality is what keeps people stuck. Not a single dramatic failure, not one bad decision. The accumulated cost of all the days they did not show up because the feeling was not right. The identity shift that makes everything easier. Here is something that changes the entire equation. When showing up is a decision you make based on how you feel, it will always be in competition with how you feel. Every day is a new negotiation. Every morning is another argument between what you have committed to and what your current emotional state is willing to support. And in that argument, feeling has the home court advantage, because feeling is immediate and vivid and present, while commitment is abstract and future-oriented and easy to defer. But when showing up is part of who you are, when it is not a decision you make each day, but an expression of an identity you have already established, the negotiation disappears, not because the difficult mornings disappear, not because resistance stops showing up, but because the question changes. It moves from "should I show up today?" to "this is what I do." And those are fundamentally different questions with fundamentally different relationships to the resistance that will always be present. Think about the areas of your life where you show up without question, where the commitment is so deep and so established that not showing up does not even occur to you as a real option. For most people, that area is their responsibility to other people, their children, their work obligations, the commitments that have external accountability built in. Now imagine having that same quality of commitment to yourself, to your own growth, your own goals, your own standards for the kind of person you are becoming. That quality of commitment is not something you are born with. It is built. And it is built exactly the way all identity is built, through the accumulation of choices that are consistent with it, repeated often enough that they stop feeling like choices and start feeling like expressions of who you are. Every time you show up when you do not feel like it, you're casting a vote for an identity. You're telling yourself, through action rather than intention, that you are someone who does not require emotional permission to do what matters. You are building evidence for a belief about yourself that will, over time, become self-reinforcing. I am someone who shows up. That belief, once genuinely established, changes what is possible. Because the person who believes they show up no matter what will show up no matter what. And the person who shows up no matter what will inevitably create results that the person who shows up only when they feel like it will never access. Schedule beats mood every single time. Let me give you something practical to anchor this principle. Schedule beats mood every single time. When the time for something important is fixed, when it is on the calendar not as a reminder, but as a non-negotiable, it removes a decision that your mood would otherwise make for you. You do not evaluate your emotional state and then decide whether to act. The time comes and you act, because the decision was made in advance by a version of you that was not tired or distracted or looking for reasons to defer. This sounds almost too simple, and in a sense it is simple. But simple is not the same as easy, and simple is not the same as unimportant. Some of the most powerful changes in how people operate come from the implementation of simple structures that remove the constant renegotiation between intention and feeling. The structure carries the behavior when the feeling cannot. Think about how this applies to the things you want to be consistent about in your life right now, the project you want to make genuine progress on, the habit you want to establish, the practice, physical, creative, relational, personal, that you know matters but keeps getting displaced by the more urgent demands of the day. What would it look like to schedule it in a way that treats it as non-negotiable, not flexible, not contingent on energy levels or inspiration or whether everything else has been handled first? Non-negotiable. The way you treat the commitments that have external accountability, the ones where not showing up has immediate visible consequences. When you give your own growth the same quality of commitment you give to your external responsibilities, something shifts. It stops being optional. And when it stops being optional, it stops being something you talk yourself in and out of every day. It becomes something you simply do. Boredom is not a signal to stop. It is a sign of depth. There is a stage in the development of any meaningful skill, any significant relationship, any long-term project that most people never talk about honestly. The stage where it gets boring, the novelty is worn off. The initial excitement that made everything feel vivid and significant has faded. What is left is the work itself, stripped of the emotional charge that made it feel worthwhile in the early days. And that work, without the charge, often feels repetitive, unglamorous, and difficult to justify continuing. This is the moment where most people leave, not because they have completed what they set out to do, not because the work has stopped being valuable, but because the feeling that told them it was valuable has temporarily disappeared, and without that feeling, they cannot find the internal justification to stay. Here is what those people do not understand about boredom. Boredom is not a signal that you have gone as far as you can go. It is not an accurate assessment of whether the work is worthwhile. It is the experience of the surface rewards disappearing, the novelty, the external encouragement, the feeling of obvious progress, which creates the conditions for something deeper to become available. Depth is where mastery lives, and depth cannot be reached by anyone who leaves when boredom arrives, because boredom is the threshold between surface and depth. It is the point at which casual participants opt out and serious ones continue. When you stay with something past the point of boredom, when you keep showing up to the work even after the novelty is gone and the results have slowed and the excitement has been replaced by the quieter, less immediately satisfying experience of sustained effort, you access a level of skill, understanding, or connection that simply is not available to those who leave earlier. This applies to your professional development, to your most important relationships, to your creative work, to the physical practices that support your health and your energy, to the inner work that this entire guide has been about. The people who go deep in any of these areas are not the ones with the most talent at the beginning. They are the ones who stayed long enough after boredom arrived to discover what was on the other side of it. And what is on the other side of boredom, reliably and without exception, is mastery. The kind of embodied, integrated competence that cannot be rushed, cannot be shortcutted, and cannot be accessed by anyone who requires constant novelty and excitement to maintain their commitment. Stay with the boring parts. They are where the real work happens. The compounding effect of consistent presence. Let me talk about something that is genuinely difficult to appreciate until you have experienced it firsthand. The compounding effect of consistent presence over time. Most people understand compounding in financial terms. The principle that small amounts, invested consistently over long periods, produce returns that seem disproportionate to the individual contributions. That the growth is not linear. It does not simply add 1 unit for each unit invested, but exponential, accelerating over time in ways that make the early contributions look small relative to their eventual impact. The same principle applies to consistent showing up, to the daily, undramatic, unglamorous practice of being present for your own development, your own goals, your own standards. In the early stages, the returns look modest. You show up consistently for a week, for a month, and the results are real, but not dramatic. You are slightly better, slightly more capable, slightly more grounded than you were. The improvement is genuine, but not yet visible to most people watching from the outside. Not yet the kind of change that generates external recognition or confirmation that you are on the right track. This is the period where most people stop, not because nothing is happening, but because what is happening is not yet visible enough to feel like sufficient return on the investment of consistent effort. But the people who continue, who show up through the period of invisible growth, who trust the process even when the evidence of its working is not yet available to the naked eye. Those people eventually reach the threshold where the compounding becomes visible, where the accumulated investment of consistent presence begins to produce returns that are disproportionate to any individual day's effort. The career that looks like a sudden breakthrough. The relationship that seems to have achieved an almost effortless depth. The skill that appears to have arrived fully formed. The person who seems to have changed in a way that looks rapid from the outside. None of it is sudden. None of it arrived without the years of consistent showing up that preceded it. The overnight success is always, without exception, the public visibility of private consistency that has been accumulating for far longer than anyone watching can see. Your consistent showing up right now, today, this week, this month, is building something, even if you cannot see it yet, even if nobody around you is acknowledging it, even if the results feel distant and the progress feels slow, and there are days when the honest question is whether any of this is actually working. It is working. Trust the compounding. Keep showing up. When life interrupts, and it will, I want to address something directly because this guide would be incomplete without it. Life will interrupt your consistency. It is not a possibility. It is a certainty. There will be periods, illness, family crisis, professional upheaval, grief, the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep can reach, when your capacity to show up at your normal standard is genuinely compromised. When the discipline this guide has been building, however strong it has become, is not equal to the weight of what you are carrying. This is not failure. This is being human. The question is not whether interruptions will come. It is what your relationship with consistency looks like on the other side of them. Untrained minds treat interruptions as endings, as evidence that the consistency was never real, that the commitment was always fragile, that the version of themselves that was showing up regularly was somehow not the true version. They use the interruption as a starting line for a spiral of self-criticism that makes returning to the practice feel loaded with shame and significance. Trained minds treat interruptions as interruptions, pauses, periods that are part of the long arc of a life lived with genuine intention, not evidence of failure, but evidence of the complexity and unpredictability of the human experience that this entire guide has been designed to help you navigate. The return to consistency after an interruption does not need to be dramatic. It does not require a declaration or a fresh start or a recommitment ritual. It requires one thing: showing up the next available day, not the perfect day, not the day when everything is back to normal and you feel ready and the conditions are right. The next available day, in whatever capacity is genuinely possible, at whatever level your current state allows. That return, quiet, undramatic, without fanfare, is itself an act of profound self-respect. It says, in the clearest possible language, that who you are is not determined by what interrupted you, that your standards belong to you and not to your circumstances, that you are the kind of person who comes back, and coming back, done consistently enough, becomes its own kind of strength. The strength of someone who has learned through experience that they do not need everything to be perfect before they can begin again. Showing up for others and what it teaches you. There is a dimension of consistent showing up that extends beyond your individual goals and practices, and I want to spend some time here because for people in your stage of life, it is often the most meaningful dimension of all. Showing up for other people, not in the performative sense, being present in body while absent in attention, checking the box of physical presence while remaining fundamentally elsewhere in your mind and your energy, but genuinely showing up, being actually there, available, responsive, engaged in the relationships that matter most to you. This is harder than it sounds in a world that is engineered to fragment attention, the devices, the notifications, the constant low-grade pressure of everything that is not happening right in front of you, but is insisting on your attention anyway. The accumulated fatigue of a life with real responsibilities that leaves genuine presence feeling like a luxury you cannot always afford. But here is what consistent presence in your relationships teaches you that nothing else can. It teaches you that showing up is a gift, not to the other person only, though it is genuinely that, but to yourself. Because the experience of being fully present in a relationship, of giving your complete attention without reservation, produces something in you that divided presence cannot. It produces connection, real connection, the kind that does not require anything beyond the quality of the attention being offered, the kind that fills something that is not filled by productivity or achievement or any of the external markers of a life going well. And it teaches you something about your own capacity that purely individual pursuits cannot reveal. It teaches you that you are capable of giving without immediate return, that you can be present for someone else's difficulty without needing it to resolve quickly so you can move on, that your attention is a genuine resource, valuable, finite, worth protecting, and worth offering deliberately. The people in your life who have experienced your genuine presence, your full, undivided, unhurried attention, will tell you, if you ask them honestly, that it is one of the most significant things you have ever offered them, not what you achieved or provided materially, that you were actually there. Show up for the people who matter, fully, consistently, without your attention split between what is in front of you and everything else competing for your bandwidth. It will change your relationships, and it will change you, the quiet ones who win. I want to paint a picture for you. Imagine two people starting at roughly the same place, similar circumstances, similar capabilities, similar awareness of what they want and what needs to change for them to get there. The first person moves in bursts. They are extraordinary when inspired, productive, focused, energized, capable of output that genuinely impresses. But when the inspiration fades, when the novelty disappears, when the work becomes difficult or slow or unglamorous, they withdraw. They rest. They regroup. They wait for the next wave of energy before committing again. The second person moves steadily. They are not always extraordinary. On many days, they are entirely ordinary, showing up with moderate energy, producing work that is competent rather than brilliant, maintaining their standards without any particular emotional charge around doing so. But they show up every day, without drama, without fanfare, without requiring the conditions to be favorable before they begin. 5 years later, the gap between these two people is enormous. Not because the first person was not capable of brilliance, they were. Not because the second person was more talented, they were not. But because the second person's consistent, undramatic presence has compounded in ways that the first person's intermittent brilliance simply cannot match. The first person's life looks, from the outside, like a series of promising starts that never quite reach their potential. The second person's life looks, from the outside, like a quiet but steady progression toward something real. From the inside, the second person's experience is not glamorous. It does not feel like winning in the dramatic, cinematic sense of the word. It feels ordinary. It feels like just another day of showing up and doing the work. But ordinary days, stacked consistently, build extraordinary lives. That is the truth that motivation never tells you. Because motivation is invested in making effort feel exciting, and the truth about how real change actually happens is not exciting. It is steady. It is patient. It is the second person's quiet approach to every single day. Be the second person, not because consistency is more virtuous than brilliance, but because in the long game, which is the only game that actually matters, consistency wins every time. A final word about what this all actually means. We have covered a significant amount of ground together. We have talked about the inner game and why it is the foundation of everything. We have talked about discipline and why it is freedom rather than restriction. We have talked about calm as a trained skill, about the controlled response, about mental endurance, about clarity in chaos, about the voice inside your head, and now about the practice of showing up. 8 principles, 8 different angles on the same fundamental truth. You are not at the mercy of your circumstances. You are not defined by your reactions. You are not limited by the patterns that have formed in you over the years through no particular fault of your own. You are not stuck with the version of yourself that shows up under pressure and falls short of who you know yourself capable of being. The mind that wins is built, and building it is within your reach. But I want to be honest with you about something before we finish, because honesty, even when it is less comfortable than encouragement, is the more respectful thing to offer. This guide will not change your life by being read. It will not change your life by being agreed with, or found interesting, or shared with someone who you think needs to hear it. It will not change your life through the feeling of insight that comes from encountering an idea that resonates. That feeling is real, and it is valuable as a starting point. But it is only a starting point. This changes your life when you apply it. When you choose, in an actual moment of pressure, to pause instead of react. When you show up on a day when you genuinely do not feel like it, and do not make a big deal out of that fact, just show up and begin. When you notice the harsh tone of your inner voice and redirect it with the same patient consistency you would bring to training any other skill. When you do the boring, unglamorous, repetitive work of actually training your mind, rather than just thinking about training your mind, that is where this becomes real. Not in the reading of it, in the living of it. The person you are becoming. I want to leave you with something that I hope you will carry with you long after the specific principles of this guide have faded into the background of your daily life. You are in the process of becoming someone, not in the vague, aspirational sense of having potential that has not yet been realized. In the specific, concrete, daily sense of making choices. Small ones mostly, invisible ones, the kind that nobody else notices and that do not feel significant in the moment, that are cumulatively shaping the person you will be in 5 years, in 10 years, in the chapters of your life that have not yet begun. Those choices are happening whether you are conscious of them or not. The question is not whether you are becoming someone. You are? The question is whether the person you are becoming is the person you have decided to be, or the person that your unexamined habits and untrained reactions are building by default. Consciousness of this process changes it. Not perfectly, not immediately, not without difficulty and backsliding, and the occasional day when you fall entirely back into the patterns you thought you had moved past. But meaningfully, substantially, in ways that compound over time into something that genuinely represents who you have chosen to be. You are 35 or 40 or 45. You have enough life behind you to know what it looks like when things do not go the way you hoped. You have enough experience to know the difference between what you want and what you are actually building. You have enough wisdom, more than you probably give yourself credit for, to understand, somewhere beneath the noise, what actually matters and what is simply urgent. Use that wisdom. Let it inform not just your intentions, but your daily choices. Let it be the foundation from which you train, rather than simply the perspective from which you evaluate what you have not yet done. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from here, with everything you know, everything you have survived, everything you have learned about yourself through the years of living that have brought you to this exact moment. That is not nothing. That is everything. This is where the real work begins. We have reached the end of this guide, but I want to be clear about something. This is not the end of the work. This is the beginning of it. What you have encountered here is a framework, a way of thinking about your mind and your habits and your capacity for change that is, I hope, more honest and more useful than the version of self-development that promises transformation without effort. The framework is only as valuable as what you do with it, and what you do with it begins now, not in some future moment when the conditions are better, when you feel more ready, when the circumstances of your life have arranged themselves in a way that makes beginning feel less daunting. now, with whatever energy you have available, with whatever part of these ideas resonates most strongly with where you are right now, with the willingness to begin imperfectly, to apply these principles clumsily at first, to get it wrong and return to it and get it slightly less wrong the next time. That is how training works. That is how all real growth works. Choose one principle from this guide, just one, the one that felt most true, most relevant, most immediately applicable to the specific challenges and pressures and opportunities that are present in your life right now. Practice it deliberately. Notice when it is difficult. Notice when the old patterns reassert themselves. Notice when you manage to do the trained thing instead of the reactive thing, even once, even partially, even in a way that does not look like mastery yet. Those moments are the training. They are not the evidence that you are not there yet. They are the proof that you are on the way. The mind that wins is not finished. It is always in the process of becoming more stable, more grounded, more capable of choosing response over reaction, intention over impulse, the long game over the short relief. That process does not end, and that is not a burden. That is the point. Because the person who has committed to that ongoing process, who has decided that training their mind is not a project with a completion date, but a practice that belongs to every day of their life, that person does not need to fear what comes next. Whatever comes next, they will be ready, not because they have prepared for every specific possibility, but because they have trained something more fundamental and more durable than any specific skill. They have trained themselves, and a trained mind, meeting whatever situation life brings forward, stays in control. That is how winning actually happens. Not once, not dramatically, not in a single defining moment that changes everything, again and again, quietly, consistently, every single day. Final reflection. Carry this forward. Before you close this guide and step back into the full complexity of your life, I want to offer you something to take with you. Not a summary, not a list of action items. Something simpler than that. A question. Every day, in the moments that test you, the moments when pressure rises and emotions want to take over, and the easiest thing would be to react rather than respond. Ask yourself this: who am I choosing to be right now? Not who you want to be eventually, not who you are capable of being in ideal conditions. Who you are choosing to be in this specific moment, with this specific challenge, with this specific opportunity to either act from your training or fall back into your habits. That question, asked honestly and answered with integrity, is the entire practice distilled into a single moment of choice. You will not always choose perfectly. Nobody does. But you will choose more consciously, more deliberately, more in alignment with the person you have decided to become. And over time, that conscious choosing, repeated in moment after moment through difficulty and pressure and the ordinary unglamorous demands of a real life, becomes character, becomes identity, becomes the version of you that other people experience as steady, as trustworthy, as someone who can be counted on to remain themselves when everything around them is uncertain. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. Train your mind, show up, choose again and again who you are. The rest will follow.